39 kilometers, about 24 miles.
That is the width of the Strait of Hormuz at its narrowest point. You could drive it in 20 minutes. A fit person could swim it. And right now, that gap is closed, shaking the world economy. Because through it passes 1/4 of every drop of oil that moves by sea on this planet. But here is what nobody is telling you. This strait is cracking, and it has nothing to do with the bombs. To understand what is actually happening here, you need to go back to when none of this existed. No Persian Gulf, no strait, no oil fields, just two massive tectonic plates, the Arabian Plate and the Eurasian Plate, slowly and relentlessly moving toward each other. The Arabian Plate has been pushing north at roughly 2 to 3 centimeters per year for tens of millions of years. That collision folded the Earth's crust like a piece of paper being pushed from both ends, building the Zagros Mountains, a 1,600-kilometer chain running from eastern Turkey to the tip of the Gulf, Iran's backbone. But the collision did not just build mountains, it did 3 things simultaneously. First, the Zagros rose, giving Iran its natural fortress. Second, the weight of those mountains pressed the crust downward, creating a shallow basin that would become the Persian Gulf, on average only 50 meters deep, shallower than most lakes. Third, the same folding created underground geological traps that imprisoned hydrocarbons for tens of millions of years. As geologist Edwin Nissen of the University of Colorado has put it, the Zagros has everything going for it for oil and gas. Now add the choke point. The Musandam Peninsula, part of Oman, projects northward like a dagger, pointing directly at Iran. It is composed of rigid rock that held firm while the rest of the basin flexed and sank. That is why the strait is so narrow. The choke point is a direct consequence of the collision. One collision, mountains, depression, oil traps, choke point, the same process, and the collision has not stopped. The plates are still moving, right now. That movement is the first way the strait is cracking. GPS data shows 4 millimeters per year of crustal shortening in the northwest Zagros, accelerating to 9 millimeters per year in the southeast, directly toward the strait. That deformation accumulates along fault lines for decades and centuries until the rock ruptures. The strait sits at the worst possible spot. To the west, 2 continents are grinding into each other. To the east, the ocean floor is being pulled beneath Iran like a sheet being dragged off a table. 2 different forces, 2 different directions, meeting directly beneath the world's most important energy corridor. This is not theoretical. On November 12, 2017, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake struck near Ezgila in western Iran. More than 600 were killed, tens of thousands displaced. Bandar Abbas, Iran's primary port on the strait, sits inside the same fold and thrust belt. Active faults cut through it east to west. Earthquakes of magnitude 5 and above have already been recorded there. The difference between Bandar Abbas and Ezgila is not geology, it is time. But the geology cracking underneath is only the first layer. On the surface of this strait, something else is breaking. The Persian Gulf should not have functioning coral reefs. Water temperatures here regularly hit 35 degrees Celsius, a level that causes mass bleaching and death in every other reef system on Earth. But the reefs around Hormuz Island have not died. Over thousands of years of extreme thermal cycling, they developed a heat tolerance that marine biologists consider one of the most significant cases of adapted evolution in the ocean. These reefs support over 700 fish species and sustain the protein supply of the entire northern Gulf Coast. Evolution works in millennia. Oil spills work in hours. The daily tanker traffic passes within kilometers of the reef zones. The Gulf's shallowness, less than 50 meters, means no depth buffer between shipping lanes and the reefs below. On Keshem Island, the Hara forest covers approximately 2,400 hectares of mangroves that filter salt through their roots. The forest functions as the Gulf's nursery. Shrimp and juvenile fish breed in the mangrove channels, then migrate into deeper water where they sustain coastal fisheries. When this nursery degrades, the fishery collapses. That is not environmental abstraction. It is the removal of a food system that has fed this region for centuries. The geology is cracking underneath. The ecosystems are cracking on the surface. But there is a third layer of fracture that almost nobody outside the region has ever heard of. Hormuz Island sits at the mouth of the strait and looks like nowhere else on Earth. Mountains banded in iron oxide red, sulfuric yellow, salt white, and violet. The people who live here eat the geology. Red clay called gallic mixed into flatbread and traded as seasoning along the coast. The fishermen share their water with supertankers close enough to read the names on their hulls from shore. On Keshem Island, the island of Laft has solved extreme heat for 1,000 years without electricity. Wind towers channel cooler air downward through internal baffles, producing a significant temperature drop with no moving parts and no energy input. Alongside them, 366 ancient wells are used in annual rotation, one per day, cycling through the water table to preserve an aquifer in a place that generates almost no fresh water. On the Musandem Peninsula, accessible only by sea, the settlement of Kumzar developed its own language, Kumzari, assembled from fragments of Persian, Arabic, Portuguese, and Hindi left by centuries of passing traders. A fossil record of the Gulf's entire commercial history compressed into daily speech. Spoken by a few hundred people, it exists nowhere else on Earth. Each of these, the wind towers, the well logic, the Lenge boat-building tradition, the Baruga masks, is a technical system encoded in practice and memory. When the people who hold that knowledge leave for cities, it stops. The ground is cracking, the ecosystems are cracking, the cultures are cracking, and then in late February 2026, the fourth layer broke. In late February 2026, US-Israeli strikes on Iranian territory effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz. Oil and gas prices spiked globally within hours. Only Saudi Arabia and the UAE have pipelines that bypass the strait, combined capacity of 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels per day. Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and Iran have no bypass whatsoever. Of the volume that normally transits, 14 million barrels per day have nowhere else to go. The geology that created the oil also created the mountains and fault systems that make building alternatives extraordinarily difficult. You cannot engineer your way out of the same collision that created the problem. And there is a dimension that almost never appears in coverage. The Gulf accounts for more than a third of global urea exports and roughly 30% of ammonia exports. The two primary feedstocks for agricultural fertilizer. A prolonged Hormuz disruption does not just raise the price of fuel. It raises the price of feeding approximately 4 billion people. The plates are still moving, the faults are still accumulating stress, the coral is still being pushed past its limits, and millions of barrels are still trapped behind a tectonic scar with no alternative and no plan. The same collision that created the world's largest oil reserves also created the choke point they are trapped behind. The fault lines that threaten it, and the extreme environment that shaped every community living on its edge. One process, 4 fractures, all accelerating at the same time. The media shows you the warships, the missiles, the diplomats, but the real fragility of Hormuz is not on the surface. It is in the rock underneath, in the reef systems along its edges, in the knowledge held by a few hundred people on a cliff above the water. And the question this place leaves open is whether a civilization that built its entire energy architecture on a crack in the earth will have the intelligence to build alternatives before the cracking reaches something it cannot fix. The next time you see Hormuz in the headlines, you will see it differently. And we would like to know, what would you build first? A bypass for the oil, or a plan for when the geology decides? Let me know in the comments. If this is the kind of content you want more of, subscribe. It helps more than you think.